I rely pretty heavily on maps and navigation apps on our phone, our smartphones, especially when traveling, because it not only tells me the fastest way, at least supposedly, but it also will recalculate and even redirect me based on the traffic conditions that are not as expected, that I can't even see. That's one of the great things, I think, is that especially when we go back to Ohio, I know whether or not I should go through the Chicagoland area based on the traffic that I can't see, but the GPS has a good handle on, or at least I trust it to. People do a lot of times. They'll say something like this: drive until you see an old white barn and then keep going. And I think, why did you tell me about the barn? Because then I'm thinking, look for the barn. Okay, keep going. Or sometimes people will reference landmarks that they remember that you don't know anything about, especially when you're new to an area. They'll say, take a left at the old Standard Oil station. But when I can see where I'm going and I can see what the road's going to look like, I feel a lot more comfortable going in a certain direction. This is despite a long history of knowing that not everything I see is really a glimpse of reality. There was this white and gold striped dress that was all over the internet. Now, some said it was white and gold, and others said it was black and blue. Then people would say, if you see white and gold, that means you're more like this, and if you see black and, I don't know. People had all kinds of theories of what that meant. But our eyes are often tricked. But we're so used to trusting that it can be hard to not believe them. In the Old Testament, there's a story of King Ahaz, who ruled over the southern kingdom of Judah. And he didn't really follow the God of his fathers, but he worshiped foreign gods and idols. And one day he learned something pretty upsetting. We see this in Isaiah chapter 7. In the second verse it says, the news had come to the royal court of Judah. Syria is allied with Israel against us. So the hearts of the king and his people trembled with fear, like trees shaking in a storm. Judah was relatively small and they were pretty vulnerable. And King Ahaz knew that Syria and Israel could squash them like a bug. And so he was afraid. He saw this large army forming. He saw many men that were going to come. He imagined them coming and coming to get them. And so in the midst of all of this, God sends his mouthpiece, his prophet Isaiah, to give them a message. And he says, do not be afraid. He says, if you and the people will return to me, leave behind your ways that you were going, the way that you were worshiping other gods, the way you were worshiping other idols, the way you were trusting your future to these other things. If you instead turn away from your ways that were contrary to God's ways and repent and turn to the one true God, you won't have anything to worry about. But the king was too afraid of what he saw with his eyes. He ignored God and he trusted what his eyes could see. We think our problem is we don't make enough money, we don't have enough time, that people just don't treat us the right way. And the reality of it is what we are telling God is that we would rather be rescued from our problems than have our sin dealt with. Now, because of a sinful nature, we have a predisposition to choose to go about life on my way instead of God's. Frank Sinatra sang a song about it, didn't he? I want it my way. Burger King had a thing too. You can have it your way. Hold the pickles, hold the lettuce, special orders, don't upset us. But the idea is that we have a predisposition to want things our way, to live in a way that even if it's contrary to the design for which we were created by God. So if that is the case, if we're born in this predisposition to want things our own way, then it's natural for us not to want God to change our direction, but instead we want God to remove the fog so we can see more. We want God to level out the pavement, or if you live in Illinois, to fill up the pavement and the potholes, or to bring out the sunshine, right? We want God to fix the circumstances, but allow us to go in our own direction. It's almost like we want to take God and boil it down to one of those yellow signs, and it would say Jesus on board. And then if we have that, all of a sudden the fog would just move out of the way so we can go the way we want. The crazy thing is that we want to know where we're going. We want to know how many miles there are until the destination. If you're like me, you want to know what time it says you're going to get there so you can try and beat it. You want to choose what's on the radio. You want to choose to be in control. You even want credit when it goes well and say, man, I'm such a good driver. Look how fast I got us here and safely. Well, Only one person cried when I took that corner. The ironic part is that when things go bad, we often don't say, oh man, I really messed up. We say, God, why did you let that happen to me? Or God, you must hate me because why did this happen? But the idea of belonging to God, to returning to the one that created us, even as we follow Jesus Christ, is wrapped up in the idea of changing direction. And in large part, that's changing from relying on ourselves, relying on what we can see and what we can understand and what we want, to instead surrendering all of that to rely on what God sees, what God wants, and what God knows. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, now go out where it is deeper and let down your nets to catch some fish. Master, Simon replied, we worked hard all last night and didn't catch a thing. But it's almost like he's like, okay, well, if you say so, we'll let the nets down again. Simon had tried. I think the TV series that really enriches this passage here, because what you see is Simon and his brother go out and they would catch fish at night, and so they spend the whole night. And then there's a whole other Zebedee and his sons go out as well to try to help them, and they're trying to catch fish to help with this. And so they spend all night. And Simon had already made these deals that fell apart. He had already been trying to catch fish for so long, and he tried and he tried and he tried, and he comes to the end of himself. But I believe that Simon was so desperate that he says, okay. And so he goes out and puts the net down, and then we read, and this time their nets were so full of fish they began to tear. A shout for help brought their partners in the other boats, and soon both boats were filled with fish and on the verge of sinking. Again, if you've seen this series, what you see is, this is one of my favorite scenes, because they push out a little bit, and he throws the net over, and Simon looks at Jesus, and he's like, and then Jesus kind of gives him a little smile and a nod and says this. And then all of a sudden, whoosh, creak. It's like the whole thing fills up and the boat turns this way. And then all of a sudden, there's so many fish they can't even pull it in. It gives a visual to what's being described here and to the amazement. And then they start yelling and people are running across the beach to try to help them with the fish to bring them in, because this amazing thing has happened and no one expected it, because their eyes had told them that there was nothing there. But Simon realized what had happened, and he falls to his knees before Jesus and he says, oh Lord, please leave me. I'm such a sinful man. You know what it is? When Simon stopped relying on himself, when he stopped relying on only what he knew and what he saw, when Simon came to the end of himself, he stepped up to the beginning of God. And God showed that while Simon was limited, God was unlimited. And in that moment, there's a calling that happens. And Simon begins to follow Jesus. Jesus replied to Simon, don't be afraid. From now on, you'll be fishing for people. Or most of us are probably used to hearing that, I'll make you fishermen of men. And as soon as they landed, they left everything and followed Jesus. The people there, it says that they left everything and followed Jesus. The simple sentence demonstrates a change in direction, and not just like a hair or a degree to the right or the left, but a complete change. It says they left everything. They left their tools. They left their fishing equipment, as far as we know. They left everything they knew. They left everything, every person they knew. They left their old direction, their old way of life, all to follow Jesus. And you might say, well, Jesus never asked me to change my job. And I'd say, okay with that. That's fine. But the reality of it is if there is not a distinct change from how you were to where you are now, I wonder if you've met Jesus. Because Jesus doesn't leave you just where you are and slap a bumper sticker on you and say, hey, you're with me. He actually wants to change the way in which you live so that you're more like him. It was Simon who falls to the ground, and it was Simon who asked Jesus to leave him. Why? Because in that moment he realized how his own way, going his own way, had made him unworthy. And he recognized how turned around and how out of place his life actually was. But Jesus didn't say, I told you so. Or Jesus didn't start and say, okay, well, let's go through all the things that you did. When he said, Jesus, leave me, Jesus said that familiar saying from God, do not be afraid. In that moment, Jesus doesn't rub Simon's nose in it, right? He didn't give Simon a lecture. No, Jesus looked at a repenting Simon and gave him new directions. This idea of changing direction is also powerfully seen in the series through the life of Mary. And Nicodemus comes to her and says, explain to me what happened. I don't understand. And she says, I don't understand either, but I was one way, and now I'm completely different. And the thing that happened in between those two things was him. So let me ask you, when are you going to make the choice to let Jesus lead you in a different direction? So you don't have to be born into the right family. You don't have to be born into the right town. You don't have to be born into the right country or even on the right side of the tracks. You just have to be born again into the family of God. God works together for the good of those who love him. Do you believe it? Let's live it. That God isn't calling you into harm, but he's calling you into the good of your soul and your life for who he created you to be.